Hello, I'm Lucia Shimbo, Associate Professor at the University of São Paulo and currently a Research Fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Paris. And I'm here today with Felix Adisson, Assistant Professor at the Laboratoire Technique Territoire et Société, LATS, at the University Gustave Eiffel. Welcome.
Thank you for your invitation.
And we are here today to talk about how financial markets are transforming the production of space and at the same time socio-ecological relationships, that is, the Earth system. But we are also interested in understanding how these relationships are reshaping finance. I can give you an example. When climate risks are also influencing the so-called green finance and all the financial products associated in this circuit of finance. And the idea behind what we call planetary financialization, that is a concept and a research agenda we are developing together with the geographer Ludovic Albert and the sociologist Ivana Sokolov, and we are trying to emphasize the planetary dimension, not only as a scale, the global, but also as a planetary concern, which means the physicality of the planet itself. As urban planners, sociologists, and geographers, we've spent more than 10 years studying the interplay between finance and the production of urban space, and for us, urban production is a driving force for capital accumulation. Ivana in Argentina, Ludovic in France and in India, Felix in Italy, and myself in Brazil, we have documented how financial actors, institutions, and practices are becoming more central in the economy, in politics, and in society. And of course, we are not alone. Many others have studied this broader trend called financialization from a critical perspective. And since the global crisis of 2008, this research has grown quickly. Scholars have emphasized how finance now plays a bigger role in housing, infrastructure, shopping centers, public equipments, what we now call urban financialization. And at the core of this process is the flow of capital from financial markets into cities, and in turn how the transformation of different forms of rent coming from the ownership of real estate properties or the ownership of debts are grouped into portfolios or investment funds and then traded on capital markets. But is this really new? Not entirely. In the 80s, David Harvey had already theorized how treating land as a pure financial asset was a key feature in the development of real property in capitalism. But after 2008, urban scholars, especially critical geographers and political economists, took a renewed interest in how finance was reshaping urban space and at the same time deepening social and spatial inequalities. And financialization was not limited to cities. Other sectors like agriculture, mining, forestry, and energy have also become deeply financialized. Their land, infrastructure, and production are now governed and managed by financial investors and their logics. Even though there are many shared patterns across these sectors, the academic literature remains fragmented. Different studies focus on different sectors, housing, mining, infrastructure, energy, and they don't often speak to each other. And we have sometimes felt a little bit frustrated by this fragmentation. And part of our recent work has been to find ways to reconnect these conversations. That is why we turned to the idea of the planetary, and especially to the theory of planetary urbanization, developed by Neil Brenner and Christian Schmidt, based on previously conceptual work developed by Henri Lefebvre. And their aim was to highlight not only the global scale of contemporary urbanization, but also its relational dimensions. They wanted to stress that suburbs, coastlines, and rural areas are now all interconnected through complex, uneven, and unsustainable global flows of people, goods, ideas, energy, and materials. And all these processes are driven by capitalist urbanization. Planetary urbanization is a powerful idea, but for us it leaves out something very important today, as I've already said, the role of financial markets in reshaping these global flows of capital and space. And it also doesn't explore how financialized capitalism itself is being transformed by the environmental crisis. So we find ourselves between two insights and at the same time two gaps. The first one is that we have a growing body of research studying financialization of the production of spaces and how these are reshaping these different kinds of spaces and also economic sectors, along with their associated socio-ecological relationships. But this work is fragmented. And the second one, we have the broad concept of planetary urbanization, but it does not look to the financialized capitalism. But it does not look on financialization and financialized capitalism. This is where we introduce the concept of planetary financialization. And drawing on Marxist political ecology and social studies of finance, these concepts help us to think about the dialectical relations between financial markets and socio-ecological relationships mediated through the production of space.
So, what do we mean exactly by planetary financialization? As Lucia mentioned it, we define planetary financialization as the dialectical transformation of financial markets and socio-ecological relationship through the production of space. These relationships are not confined to any scale or ecosystem. For example, financial investment in large-scale solar plants in the northeast region of Brazil or in the south of Bordeaux in France have localized impacts. But at the same time, they are entailing long-range dynamics. For instance, the extraction of rare earth metals in China, and also are contributing to shifts in carbon emissions at the global scale. Speaking about the global scale, I would like to insist on the fact that in the concept of planetary financialization, the term planetary, while for sure a matter of scale, also emphasizes the interaction of financial markets with the earth as a socio-ecological and material system, right? In addition, it's important to insist on the fact that planetary financialization is neither uniform or omnipresent. It is a spatially selective and unequal process, as financial investments are highly specific in terms of locations, both at the national scale or infranational level, or even intra-urban spaces. But they are also selective in terms of the types of sectors, spaces, and infrastructure they target. And for example, Northeast Brazil has been constructed as a frontier for financial investment in the sector of renewable energy, but it's a devalued periphery for logistic or offices, parks, from the perspective of financialized real estate markets. And in this sense, the process unfolds through uneven geographies. And power relations are deeply embedded in this dynamic. A telling example is how financial standards and metrics are, for renewable energy again, are defined in financial centers such as London, New York, Paris, or even São Paulo. But they end up shaping the environment and everyday life in the northeast region of Brazil or the south of border, for instance. And this is where planetary financialization enters in dialogue with previous theorization and particularly subordinate financialization, highlighting the asymmetries of power and the multiple forms of inequality that structure the expansion of finance. Another key point is that planetary financialization is not a linear or a one-way process. It is dialectical. Lucia has already mentioned it, but I would like to stress it again. This means that financial markets transform socio-ecological relationships through the production of space, but in turn, socio-ecological relationships push back and reshape finance. That is how for example, increasing frequency of mega fires in California or Canada, driven by climate disruption, can influence financial products, decision-making, and investment metrics within financial markets. Now that I've laid out some elements of the theoretical definition of planetary financialization, I'd like to present its analytical definition. This is something that we are working on with Lucia, but also Ivana Sokolov and Ludovic Albert, in order to make the concept operational and useful for empirical research. That is, to help identify when, how, and where planetary financialization is actually occurring, right? And we argue that each occurrence of planetary financialization can be characterized by the presence of four key features. First, financial markets operate through the financial infrastructure of capital markets, right? These are systems that circulate investments and rents and that coordinate a wide range of heterogeneous actors. Second, every instance of planetary financialization involves the transformation of things into assets, as Ken Bursch and Fabian Muniz define assetization. This is how agricultural fields, solar plants, or shopping malls are turned into income-generating properties, or the promise of such a revenue stream, that is, assets that are then pooled in portfolio and traded on financial markets. Third, the process of assetization is not applied to abstract things. It produces concrete socio-ecological fixes. And as defined by Michael Eckers and Scott Pradham, these fixes serve two main functions. The first one is to absorb over-accumulated capital, just like spatial fixes, right? So, for example, through the construction of new real estate developments, like towers, but towers that must be understood as producing socio-ecological relationships through the material, energy, or work required for the construction and functioning. The second function is to temporarily resolve the underproduction of nature. That is the depletion of natural systems like soils or water systems due to overexploitation, and the need to reproduce this system, for instance, through inputs in agricultural fields, in order to sustain further cycles of capital accumulation. Finally, instances of planetary financialization are also marked by the labor exploitation and the expropriation of nature. While the exploitation of labor is fairly straightforward, the expropriation of nature, defined by John Bellamy Foster following Karl Marx, pushes us beyond a purely anthropocentric view. It allows us to analyze not only how capitalist production deprives humans of vital resources like land or water or even knowledge, when these resources are appropriated by financial investors, but also how non-human entities within ecosystems are themselves expropriated and reshaped by the unfolding of finance. Building on these two definitions, the, let's say, theoretical one and the analytical one, we put forward the general hypothesis of planetary financialization. And this hypothesis is as follows. Planetary financialization refers to processes in which financial markets, through the mechanisms of coordination, accumulation, and centralization, selectively amplify the volume, the speed, the rhythm, and the standardization of spatial transformation. The dynamic contributes to the overexhaustion of nature and accelerates climate and environmental changes, but in turn, this transformation generates new opportunities and needs for financial innovations and investments. For example, in blue finance, right? Both the analytical features and these general hypotheses will become clearer when grounded in a concrete example. And this is what Lucia will now present.
So let's take a concrete example, the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. The name means general mines, and the colonial and post-colonial history of this region has always been linked to extractivism, the exploitation of labor, and the expropriation of nature and people. Today, this region is embedded in the global extractive industry. The firms involved in the extraction, whether in mining, agribusiness, or construction, have become financialized. This can be evident when we look at the three major players in these sectors. For example, Vale, the largest producer of iron ore in the world, Brasil Agro, a major agribusiness and landholding company, and MRV, the largest home builder in Brazil. These companies control a wide range of assets: mines, farmland, housing developments, railways, and energy plants. And they are integrated into global financial markets and operate through financialized infrastructure. For example, their shares and bonds are traded in financial centers located in cities like New York, São Paulo, and Madrid. And they raise capital through different financial instruments such as debentures, real estate investment trusts, and derivatives. And what do they do with this capital? Vale raises money from Brazilian pension funds, oil wealth from Saudi Arabia, and from Japanese corporations. It used this capital to run and control 5 open-pit mines in Minas Gerais. The ore is then exported through railways and ports, also controlled by Vale, often under state concessions after the process of privatization occurred in Brazil in the 90s. And one destination of this production is, for example, ArcelorMittal plant here in Dunkirk, France, one of the country's largest industrial sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And Brasil Agro works in a similar way in the agribusiness sector. It uses investor capital from Argentina and Brazil to expand farmlands and intensify production by using chemical inputs. One major use of its output, for example, is animal feed for French pig farming, which is known for causing environmental damage in Brittany, in France. And a quarter of Brasil Agro's land is held as land bank, that is, uncultivated land kept for future resale and profit. MRV, one of Brazil's largest home builders, combines public and private investments to buy land and also to build housing. Its operations are directly connected to the extractive sector, as, for example, it used 750,000 cubic meters of concrete to build 50,000 homes in Minas Gerais, under the largest housing program in Brazil called Minha Casa, Minha Vida, My House, My Life. And MRV engages in the assetization of land and housing, turning them into income streams for investors, using financial instruments like debentures, backed by the ownership of real estate developments, and also real estate certificates from consumer housing loans. And what do all these activities have in common? They are linked to what we call, and Felix already mentioned that. Socio-ecological fixes, that is, physical investments that solve two problems at once. First, they represent short-term solutions to the problem of overaccumulation in financial markets. And second, they respond to the underproduction of nature, like declining ore quality or soil depletion. The problem is that these fixes come at a cost. For example, MRV has been listed twice by the state of Brazil for using labor under conditions of similar to modern slavery in construction sites. And its housing production depends directly on extractive industry like cement. Even more shocking are the Mariana and Brumadinho dam disasters linked to Vale's operation. These tragedies in 2015 and 2019 killed nearly 300 people and destroyed entire communities and ecosystems. So, while assetization, turning something into a financial asset, may sound abstract, it's deeply material. These socio-ecological fixes involve relations of exploitation of labor and expropriation of nature, and all mediated through the production of space.
The theoretical framework of planetary financialization opens, in our view, three main avenues for research. First, one linked to the environmental crisis. The second one is about the study of metabolisms. And the third one to environmental justice. The first avenue for research concerns the relationship between the financialization of capitalism and the environmental crisis. In recent years, giant steps have been made in the fields of sociology, STS, political economy to analyze the claims, tools, or policies of the so-called climate or green finance. This scholarship has really illuminated how the environmental critique has been absorbed and institutionalized by financial markets and public authorities. Yet, planetary financialization calls for research that moves beyond the critical analysis of self-defined categories or innovations or justifications and examines more broadly how finance and socio-ecological relationships shape each other through the production of space. The second avenue focuses on assessment of the socio-ecological effects of planetary financialization. And while economics as a discipline has contributed to the economicization of nature, offering a path toward its very financialization, we contend, on the contrary, that further efforts are required to evaluate the social, political, and environmental effects of financial investments. Some studies in political ecology during the last 20 years have attempted to qualitatively, but mainly quantitatively, study metabolisms. And these studies typically quantify and models flows of inputs and outputs of cattle, grains, waste, or chemical units within ecological systems, including cities. But they have yet to incorporate financial flows, and addressing this gap requires radical interdisciplinarity, a perspective that is part and parcel of the planetary in our understanding. The third avenue concerns the environmental justice. While research on financialization and inequality has primarily addressed economic disparities, integrating insights from the literature on environmental justice can help move beyond an economicist and anthropocentric understanding of justice related to financial markets. Beyond examining the footprint of finance capital, environmental justice invites us to explore how wealth inequalities amplified by the financialization of the economy manifest unequal access to natural resources or sustainable environments for humans but also non-humans. To develop these insights, these avenues for research further, we launched a collaborative research project called FinPlanet for Unsustainable Planetary Financialization. It's a 4-year program bringing together 8 institutions, 4 in Brazil, mainly in the São Paulo region, and 4 in France. And over time, around 15 scholars will contribute to this program, which is funded by the ANR, the Agence Nationale de la Recherche, and the FAPESP, the Fundação de Amparo à Pesquisa do Estado de São Paulo. And we really hope to open a multidisciplinary dialogue and a process of transnational knowledge production on planetary financialization through this research project.